Look, I didn't do anything wrong. Just told him what really happened, that every one of his friends had tried to sleep with me at some point. I thought he'd appreciate my honesty, maybe even see how disloyal they were to him. But he just stared at me like I'd confessed to something worse. He hasn't touched me since that night, and now he's moving out, legally, quietly, without a fight. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I don't think I did anything wrong. Not really. I just told him the truth. We were sitting at the dinner table, and I said that every one of his friends had tried something with me at one point. I thought he'd thank me for being honest, for finally telling him what kind of people he was surrounded by. But instead, he just froze. He looked at me for a few seconds and said nothing. Then he pushed his chair back, quietly, and walked out of the room. That silence, longer than any fight we'd ever had, made me angrier than if he'd shouted. I followed him down the hall, asking if he'd heard me. He said yes. I asked if he wasn't even going to say anything. He said no. That was it. No outrage, no questions, no thank you, just that blank calm. He went into the guest room, closed the door, and didn't come back out. I told myself he was being dramatic. Men can't handle uncomfortable truths. That's what I've always said. I'd done the right thing. If I kept something like that from him, he'd call it deception. But if I told him, suddenly I was humiliating him. That wasn't fair. It had started weeks ago, Marcus's birthday, actually. We'd all been out, the same circle of his friends we'd known for years, Tristan, Kevin, and Aaron. I remember thinking that they all looked at me differently now, not like Marcus's wife, but like some prize he didn't deserve. Later that night, when Marcus went to the bar to pay, Tristan leaned over and said, "You must know you could do better." I'd laughed it off, but it stuck with me. The next week, Kevin sent a message about meeting for coffee to talk about investments, and I knew what that meant. I didn't reply, but I liked the attention. I guess I liked knowing I still could. So when I finally told Marcus, it wasn't from guilt, it was from principle. I thought he deserved to know who his real friends were. I even started the dinner conversation calmly, saying we needed to talk about trust. He nodded, like he expected another one of my speeches about how he'd been distant lately. I told him I'd realized something ugly, that the men he called brothers had all, at some point, crossed a line with me. I waited for him to ask what I meant, but he didn't. I said Tristan had made a move at the bar, that Kevin had sent messages, that even Aaron had tried to flirt. I said it like I was confessing something noble. I said it to show I'd stayed loyal, that I'd chosen him over temptation. I thought that would mean something. Instead, Marcus just sat there, his fork halfway to his mouth, and stared at the table. When I finished, he set his fork down quietly, said "okay," and left the room. That was the whole response. I called my mother after he shut himself in the guest room. She said he was just embarrassed, that men hate feeling small. I told her I was just being honest. She said maybe I could have softened it, but that I'd done the right thing. Better to be upfront than secretive, she said. That made me feel a little better. The next morning, Marcus didn't come to bed. He took a shower in the guest bathroom and left for work early. No goodbye, no kiss, not even a glance. I thought he was trying to punish me with silence, and that only made me more certain I'd done the right thing. If he couldn't handle the truth, maybe he wasn't as strong as I thought. That afternoon, I called Tristan. I told him I'd told Marcus everything. He went quiet for a long time before saying, "Why would you do that?" I said because Marcus needed to know the truth. Tristan said that was a mistake and hung up. A few minutes later, Kevin blocked me on social media. Aaron unfollowed me completely. By evening, the group chat Marcus shared with them had disappeared from his phone screen. He came home around 8. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through listings. He didn't say hello. He walked straight upstairs, changed, then came down and reheated dinner. I tried to talk. I said we could get through this if he just focused on what mattered, that I hadn't done anything wrong. He said, "You didn't have to say it." I told him secrets were poison. He said, "So is humiliation." That word landed like a slap. I said I hadn't humiliated him. I'd exposed his fake friends. He said, "You exposed yourself more." Then he walked back upstairs. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself he just needed space. But when I got up in the morning, I noticed his wedding ring on the bathroom counter. I picked it up, expecting to feel guilt, but instead I felt something like disbelief. He was the one giving up, over honesty. I told my mother again that evening. She said maybe I should remind him that men like Tristan are dangerous, that I was trying to protect him. She said he'd come around once he realized I'd chosen loyalty over temptation. I liked the sound of that. The next day, Marcus came home late. He looked exhausted, but calm. I asked if we could talk. He said there was nothing to talk about. I told him I didn't cheat. I'd just been tested. He said, "You sound proud of that." I said I was proud of my restraint. He said, "That's not restraint, it's enjoyment with a limit." I didn't know what to say. Before bed, I tried to touch his arm, just to bridge the distance. He flinched like my hand burned him. He didn't shout, didn't push me away, just stepped aside. That was worse than anger. I said, "You're really going to act like this after I told you the truth?" He said, "You didn't tell me the truth. You told me what makes you feel powerful." Then he went back to the guest room. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, listening to the door close. That sound didn't feel temporary. It felt final. Still, I told myself he'd calm down. He always did. Honesty hurts before it heals. That's what I believed. I had no idea that this time he wasn't hurt. He was done. The morning after he moved into the guest room, the house felt strange, like he'd taken something invisible with him. He didn't look angry. That was the worst part. He looked settled, like someone who'd already made a decision and was just waiting for me to realize it. I made coffee, tried to act normal, asked if he wanted breakfast. He said no, politely, without looking up. I hated how calm he was. At work, I couldn't focus. My boss asked why I kept checking my phone. I said my husband was acting childish over something stupid. She asked what happened, and I told her the whole story, expecting sympathy. Instead, she looked uncomfortable and said maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. I told her I wasn't going to apologize for being honest. She nodded but didn't respond. By lunch, everyone in the office knew. I overheard one of the junior agents whisper, "She really said that?" I called my mother on the drive home. She told me again that men hate embarrassment more than betrayal. I told her I wasn't embarrassed. I was proud of being upfront. She said maybe I should give him time to cool off before trying to explain. But I didn't want to wait. The longer he stayed quiet, the more it felt like he was rewriting what happened. That night, he came home later than usual. He went straight upstairs, still not touching the dinner I made. I followed him, asking if he was just going to ignore me forever. He said, "You turned our marriage into a story for your ego." I told him that wasn't fair, that I'd only said what his friends had done. He said, "You don't get points for telling me something to make me feel small." I said it wasn't about him. It was about loyalty. He laughed once, without humor, and said, "You keep using that word like it means what you did." Then he shut the bathroom door. I stood outside it, humiliated and furious. The next day, I met Margot for lunch. She said maybe I should spin the story differently. Make people understand that I was protecting Marcus, not bragging. She told me to post something vague online, something like "truth hurts but lies destroy." So I did. It got likes immediately, even a comment from Tristan saying, "Some people can't handle honesty." I smiled when I saw it, like that proved my point. But that evening, Marcus saw it too. He didn't say a word. He just walked past me, grabbed a few folders from his office, and went outside. I watched him through the window as he sat in his truck making calls. His mouth moved slowly, calmly. I couldn't hear what he said, but I knew that voice, his business voice, the one he used when he meant to finish something properly. I called him 10 minutes later. He didn't answer. Instead, I got a text. "We'll talk when I'm ready." That made me furious. "You're my husband, not my boss," I replied. No response. 2 days later, one of my coworkers told me she'd seen him near the legal district. She thought maybe he was meeting a client. But Marcus didn't have clients. He was a contractor. I went cold inside. I asked what building. She said, "Hendricks and Cole." I laughed it off, pretended it didn't bother me. But I knew the name. That was a law office. That evening, I asked him directly. I waited until he came in, calm as always. I said I'd heard he'd been downtown. He said, "So?" I asked if he'd talked to a lawyer. He said, "You'll know if I did." Then he walked away. I followed him, saying I couldn't believe he'd make this serious over a conversation. He said, "You didn't have a conversation. You made a show." He slept in the guest room again. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I could hear him typing on his laptop through the door. Every click sounded like something being taken apart piece by piece. By the weekend, people were talking. Tristan stopped replying to my texts completely. Kevin's wife unfriended me. At a neighborhood cookout, I felt their stares, the whispers behind paper cups. I told one woman that Marcus was overreacting, that men can't stand being reminded other people want their wives. She nodded but avoided eye contact. Later, I saw Marcus arrive, alone, quiet, shaking hands with everyone except me. He left early, but not before speaking to one of his friends' wives in that calm tone again, the same tone that scared me now. When he got home, I asked what he was planning. He said, "I'm making sure I don't get blindsided again." I said he was being paranoid. He said, "Paranoid is thinking something might happen. I'm working with what already did." The next day, he moved a few boxes into the guest room. He said it was temporary. I asked if we were separating. He said, "We're clarifying." I told him he was overreacting to gossip. He said, "You started it." That night, I called my mother again, crying. She told me to apologize before it went too far. I said I wouldn't because I hadn't done anything wrong. She said, "Then don't be surprised if he stops listening." When I went to bed, I realized the other side of the mattress was cold, like it had been empty for weeks instead of days. I told myself this was just a phase, that Marcus was testing me to see if I'd beg. I wouldn't. I still believed I had the upper hand. But the next morning, a courier came to the door. He handed me a sealed envelope with the Hendricks and Cole logo in the corner. I signed for it, pretending not to care, but my hand shook as soon as I closed the door. Inside was a letter, calm and formal. Notice of preliminary legal consultation and property disclosure request. It even had my name typed neatly beside the words, Respondent, Leora Brandt. I read it 3 times, waiting for it to make sense. Respondent, like I'd already done something wrong. I threw the papers on the table, telling myself it was an empty threat. But when I looked around the room, at his packed boxes, at the chair where he used to sit, it didn't feel like a threat at all. It felt like a warning. That night, I lay awake, listening for the sound of him typing again. There was nothing, just silence. And somehow, that silence felt louder than anything he'd ever said. By the time the next weekend came, I was determined to fix things, or at least make everyone see that Marcus was the one overreacting. The tension in the house was unbearable. He moved around like a ghost, calm, polite, but unreachable. I couldn't stand how normal he acted, like he'd already accepted something I hadn't agreed to. So, when one of his friends, Aaron, invited us to a small get-together at the local bar, I told Marcus we were going. He said, "You can go if you want." I said we should show everyone we were fine. He said quietly, "You can show them whatever you want." That night, I dressed carefully. I told myself if he saw me looking confident, he'd remember what he was losing. When I walked downstairs, he barely looked up. I asked if he was coming. He said, "No point." That hurt, but I didn't let it show. I went anyway. The bar, Anchor's End, was already crowded when I arrived. I could feel the looks, some curious, some judgmental. Aaron greeted me awkwardly, and I could tell he didn't know whether to hug me or not. I smiled too brightly, told everyone Marcus had been busy with work. A few people nodded politely, but the air felt thick with something unspoken. Then I saw Tristan at the counter. He looked uncomfortable, but still handsome in that lazy, smug way. I walked over and said we should talk. He said he didn't think that was a good idea. I laughed and said, "Relax, I'm not here to cause trouble." I told him I didn't understand why everyone was treating me like the villain when all I did was tell the truth. He said, "Because you made it public." That stung. I said Marcus was making it public by acting like I'd destroyed his life. Tristan said quietly, "He doesn't have to say anything, Leora. People talk without him saying a word." I didn't like that answer. When I turned around, I noticed Elaine, my mother-in-law, sitting in the corner with one of Marcus's sisters. Their faces were cold, unreadable. I went over to greet them, but Elaine barely nodded. I said I'd been honest because I respected her son. She said, "You respect no one, not even yourself." I told her that was unfair, that I hadn't cheated. She said, "You've still made him ashamed." Then she stood and left. I went back to the bar, my hands shaking. I needed to take control. People were whispering, I could tell. So I did the one thing I shouldn't have. I asked the bartender to turn the music down, and I raised my voice just enough. I said everyone needed to stop pretending. I said half the men in that room had flirted with me at one point, and that Marcus had been too blind to notice. The room went silent. Tristan told me to stop. Kevin, sitting near the back, muttered something under his breath about me twisting stories. I said loudly that I wasn't twisting anything, that Marcus's friends were the ones who crossed lines, not me. Aaron tried to calm me down, but I pulled my arm away and said, "You all tried me, and now you're acting holy." The silence that followed felt endless. I expected someone to defend me. No one did. Instead, I saw them looking past me, and when I turned, Marcus was standing near the door. He wasn't glaring or shouting. He was just watching, hands in his pockets, that same unbearable calm. He walked forward slowly. Everyone went quiet. I waited for him to finally explode, to accuse them all. But he didn't. He just looked at me and said, "Are you finished?" I said I wasn't the one who should be embarrassed. He said, "You're right about that. I'm not embarrassed anymore." His voice was so even it scared me. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a white envelope, and set it on the bar next to my drink. I asked what it was. He said, "You'll find out." Then he turned to leave. I said, "You're walking away again?" He said, "For the last time." Then he was gone. People started whispering again. I grabbed the envelope and left before anyone could say more. Outside, the night air hit my face like ice. I sat in my car, staring at the envelope. My name was written neatly on the front. Leora Brandt. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was another letter from Hendricks and Cole. This one said, "Petition for legal separation and preliminary custody discussion scheduled." I felt like the ground fell out from under me. He'd gone through with it. The quiet, careful moves I'd ignored weren't warnings. They were preparations. He hadn't been indecisive. He'd been ready. I called my mother immediately. She picked up, already half asleep. I told her Marcus had filed papers. She said, "He won't actually follow through." I said he already had. She sighed and asked what I expected after what I'd done. I told her I hadn't done anything wrong. She said, "You've been saying that for weeks, and it's not helping." I hung up. I couldn't bear the sound of disappointment in her voice. I sat there in the parking lot. until the lights inside the bar started going out. Tristan came out last, saw me sitting there, and walked past without a word. That silence hurt worse than shouting. When I finally got home, the house was dark except for a small light in the guest room. I wanted to go in, to confront him, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the envelope still in my hand, the weight of it. I left it on the kitchen counter and went upstairs alone. I thought about the way he'd looked at me, calm, detached, final. It didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like pity. And I realized, for the first time, that I'd lost him not because of what I'd done, but because I couldn't stop talking about it, like I'd done nothing at all. Still, I told myself he'd come to his senses. He'd always cooled off before. I'd make him see reason. But deep down, I already knew. That envelope wasn't the start of a fight. It was the end of one. The next few days blurred together. Marcus moved through the house like a guest, quiet, polite, efficient. He made his own coffee, packed his own lunches, even started doing his laundry separately. I tried to act unaffected, but the sound of him closing the washing machine door made my skin crawl. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was erasure. I couldn't let him finish whatever he'd started. On Tuesday, I told myself I'd fix it. I waited until he left for work, then went into his office. The door was locked. That was new. He'd never locked anything from me before. I found the spare key in the junk drawer. He must have forgotten about it and opened the door. His desk was spotless, too neat for someone who worked long hours. On the shelves, I noticed several black binders lined up perfectly. Each was labeled in his handwriting. Messages, statements, photos, property records. My chest tightened. I told myself it was just financial stuff, contractor paperwork, maybe tax documents. But curiosity pulled me closer. I opened the one labeled messages. Inside were printed screenshots, text conversations, emails, timestamps. My name appeared over and over. There were my messages to Tristan, the ones I'd deleted. Lines like "you make me feel seen," and "he never looks at me that way anymore." My stomach turned. The pages were numbered, organized by date, with notes written neatly in the margins. He'd been collecting everything. I flipped to another section and saw screenshots of posts, my quotes about honesty, comments from Tristan, even things I'd said to co-workers online. Next to one, Marcus had written, "Pattern, self-victimization, public justification." I slammed the binder shut, shaking. In the next folder, statements, there were typed pages, apparently testimonies from people we both knew. My co-worker Jenna, his friend Aaron, even my own mother. Each one had a short paragraph describing concerns regarding Leora's emotional behavior or unusual boundary issues. It read like something out of a trial. He'd been building a case against me quietly, patiently. I could almost hear his calm voice in my head. "I told you I was clarifying." This was what he meant. I put the folders back exactly as they were, trying not to leave fingerprints. As I turned to leave, I noticed an envelope taped to the inside of the desk drawer. It was labeled contingency, custody. My breath caught. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it was. When I heard his truck pull into the driveway later that evening, I pretended I'd been cooking. He walked in, glanced at me, and said he'd already eaten. I asked if we could talk. He said he was tired. I followed him anyway, asked how long he was planning to stay in the guest room. He said, "Until I finish what I started." I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see soon enough." I snapped then. I said he was being cruel, that he was trying to destroy me over a few stupid comments. He said, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm documenting what's already broken." His voice didn't rise, not even a little. That calmness, it made me feel small, like nothing I said could matter anymore. Later that night, I called my mother again. I told her Marcus had gone insane, that he was turning our marriage into an investigation. She went quiet, then said she'd already talked to him. My throat tightened. "Why would you do that?" I asked. She said she was worried. "He's not angry, Leora," she said softly. "He's preparing." I hung up before she could explain. The next morning, I went to the real estate office, trying to focus on work, but I couldn't. Every client call sounded distant. My phone buzzed twice, texts from coworkers saying they'd heard rumors. One said Marcus had frozen our joint account for financial clarity. I checked my banking app. He had. My name was listed under secondary access pending review. I drove straight home, furious. He was in the backyard, fixing something near the fence. I marched up to him and said he'd gone too far. He said, "I'm just protecting what's left." I told him he had no right. He said, "You gave me every right the day you decided humiliation counted as truth." I started crying, but he didn't move. He just stood there, holding the hammer loosely, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "You should stop before you make it worse for yourself." That was when I noticed his phone was recording, propped up on the porch rail, facing us. My heart dropped. He was recording everything now, every word, every fight. I backed away, trying to act calm. "You're paranoid," I said. He replied, "No, I'm done guessing." Then he went back to his work. Inside, I slammed the door and called my mother again. She didn't answer. I left a long message saying everyone was turning against me, that Marcus was making me look like a monster. Halfway through, I started believing my own words. That evening, I poured a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the binders I'd seen in his office. The image of them wouldn't leave me. The neat handwriting, the order, the preparation. He hadn't acted out of emotion once. He'd turned my life into evidence. For the first time, I felt afraid, not of him, but of how certain he was. He wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. He was building something solid and cold. A case. Before I went to bed, I opened the banking app again. Another update. Mortgage reassigned pending petition review. I whispered to myself, he wouldn't actually take the house. But my voice shook. In the middle of the night, I thought I heard him moving around again, typing in that soft, steady rhythm. Every click was another nail sealing something shut. And for the first time since this started, I realized he wasn't coming back to me. He was preparing to leave me permanently, and making sure I had nothing left when he did. The day of the mediation started grey and wet. I woke up to the sound of rain against the window and the low hum of Marcus moving downstairs. He was humming softly while making coffee, something he only did when he felt calm. I hated that sound. It meant he was at peace while I was unraveling. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching him pack a leather folder into his bag. When he noticed me, he didn't look surprised. He just said, "We have to be there by 9. No anger, no hesitation, just a statement. I spent an hour getting ready, trying to look composed. I chose a light grey suit, kept my hair neat, applied soft makeup. I wanted to appear reasonable, wronged even. In the mirror, I rehearsed what I'd say, that I'd been misunderstood, that my honesty had been twisted into betrayal. I imagined the mediator seeing through his calm act, realizing he'd been manipulating the situation from the start. The law office was cold, the air filled with the faint smell of coffee and paper. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He nodded politely, as if I were a client. His lawyer, a woman in her 40s, greeted me by name. I noticed how relaxed Marcus looked sitting beside her, hands folded on the table, eyes steady. My lawyer sat next to me, whispering that we should stay calm, that overreacting would play into his narrative. I didn't like that word, narrative, like my life was something he was writing. The mediator, a soft-spoken man in glasses, began the session. He said this was a conflict resolution process designed to reach fairness. I smiled tightly and said I'd always wanted fairness. Marcus didn't respond. When the mediator asked if I wanted to speak first, I said yes. I told them everything. how Marcus had withdrawn, how he'd made me feel invisible, how I'd been honest about the attention I received because I thought we could rebuild trust from truth. I said I never cheated, never lied, that I was simply open about reality. My voice cracked a little, but I kept going, explaining how he'd turned my honesty into humiliation. I said he'd weaponized calmness, making me look unstable while he collected evidence to destroy me. When I finished, the mediator nodded, thanked me, and turned to Marcus. His lawyer opened a folder labeled Exhibits. Inside were pages, too many to count. She laid them out methodically, one after another, screenshots of my texts, receipts from lunches, private messages to Tristan. She even had printed comments from my social media, highlighted in yellow. Each piece was explained calmly, with dates and context. My stomach twisted as she spoke. Then came a document I didn't expect, a financial summary. It showed transfers from our joint account to my personal card, small amounts that added up, unauthorized expenditures, she called them, dinners, gifts, drinks, trips, all linked to the same time frame as the messages. My lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I interrupted, saying those dinners were with clients, not friends. The lawyer said the receipts showed two-person bills and evening timestamps. She said, "It demonstrates a pattern." I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to stop her, but he didn't. He just watched, calm as ever, fingers resting on the table. I said this was petty, obsessive even. The mediator raised a hand gently, asking me to let her finish. She continued, "Mr. Brandt is not seeking damages, only clarity regarding assets and custody." Her tone was almost kind, which made it worse. When my turn came again, I tried to sound composed. I said Marcus had isolated me, that he was punishing me for being desired. I said he was controlling, that he'd built this story to make himself the victim. The mediator asked softly if I had any proof of that. I froze. I said, "You can't prove feelings." Marcus spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet. "I don't need to prove feelings. I'm just protecting our daughter from confusion." That word, confusion, hit me harder than any accusation could. He wasn't even angry anymore. He sounded tired, like someone closing a book. I tried again to explain that I'd only told the truth because I respected him. He said, "You respected the performance of truth, not the consequences." I told him he was twisting everything. He said, "I'm just recording it." The mediator called for a short break. In the hallway, my lawyer told me we were losing ground. "He's got a clean record, steady tone, documented everything," he said. "Judges love that." I told him Marcus was emotionally manipulative. He said quietly, "Then you'll need to prove it with something besides anger." When we went back in, the mediator summarized the recommendations. Temporary full custody to Marcus pending review. Property division leaning toward his claim since he'd proven financial responsibility. I said I couldn't lose the house. The mediator said we could appeal once we provided counter-evidence. Marcus's lawyer said, "We've already submitted ours." I looked at Marcus, waiting for some sign that he'd ease up, but his expression didn't change. He wasn't cruel, just certain. I realized then that he wasn't doing this out of rage. He was finishing something he'd started the night I called it honesty. After the meeting, he stood, thanked the mediator, and turned to me. "Take care of yourself," he said, as if I were a stranger. I followed him out to the parking lot, saying he didn't have to do this. He said, "I already did." Then he got into his truck and drove away, not looking back once. I sat in my car, staring at the rain streaking the windshield. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "How did it go?" I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. For years I'd prided myself on being the one who spoke the truth, who said what others wouldn't. But now, sitting there surrounded by silence and rain, I finally understood what Marcus's calm had meant all along. It wasn't indifference. It was victory. He hadn't shouted, hadn't accused. He just let me talk until every word became evidence against myself. And the worst part was, I still didn't know when he'd stopped loving me, or if maybe, quietly, he'd stopped long before I ever opened my mouth. The house felt different when I came back from mediation. Lighter somehow, emptier, as if the walls were breathing again, now that he had what he wanted. His shoes were gone from the doorway, his jacket from the hook. Even his mug, the one he used every morning, had vanished. I stood there holding my purse, staring at the bare counter, realizing he'd taken only the things that mattered. I told myself it didn't hurt, but my throat tightened anyway. Later that night, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water, waiting for some kind of message, some sign that he wanted to talk. Instead, a different sound came, a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, a courier handed me another thick envelope. Inside were final documents, custody granted, property retained by petitioner, case closed. My name appeared second again, like a footnote. I read it twice, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was, in bold print. The house, the car, even the savings account. Everything was his now. I called my lawyer immediately. He said it was over, that the judge had approved Marcus's proposals based on clear documentation and consistent demeanor. Those words made me dizzy. I said, "So because he stayed quiet, he wins?" The lawyer said, "Because he stayed consistent." Then he told me to consider cooperation if I wanted visitation to go smoothly. I hung up without replying. For days, I tried to convince myself I could still control the story. I told my co-workers that Marcus had rushed things, that I was still deciding what to do, but no one looked at me the same. People smiled politely, avoided details. Even my mother sounded careful on the phone, her voice small. She said maybe I should take a break from work, focus on myself. I asked if she thought I deserved this. She said softly, "Deserve has nothing to do with it." One evening, I drove by Marcus's new place. The lights were on, warm and steady. Through the window, I saw him in the kitchen with Nina. She was laughing, loudly, freely, the way she used to. He looked relaxed, bending to listen as she talked. I wanted to knock, to remind them I still existed, but I didn't. I just sat there watching until Nina turned toward the window. I ducked, heart racing, then drove away fast. Back home, the silence was unbearable. I tried to sleep but kept hearing echoes of his voice in my head. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm documenting what's already broken." I told myself he'd just gotten lucky, that judges favored calm men. But the more I repeated it, the hollower it sounded. He hadn't gotten lucky. He'd been patient. That was worse. The next day, I found a box on the porch. Inside were my old photos, a few books, and a note written in his tidy handwriting. "Returning what belongs to you." No greeting, no farewell. Just that. I sat on the floor and went through the photos. Our wedding, our first apartment, Nina's 5th birthday. In every picture, he was looking at me like he used to believe in something. I tore one in half before realizing my hands were shaking too much to finish. I tried calling him once, just to hear his voice. The call went straight to voicemail. His recorded tone was calm, distant. "You've reached Marcus Brandt. Please contact counsel for all inquiries." I laughed, bitter and small, and whispered, "You sound proud of yourself." Later that night, my mother came by without warning. She brought food I didn't touch. She said maybe this was a sign to start over. I told her Marcus had humiliated me, that he'd turned my honesty into ammunition. She said, "You keep calling it honesty. Maybe it was cruelty dressed as truth." I snapped that she was taking his side. She said, "I'm taking the side that's still standing." Then she left quietly, closing the door behind her. When the house went dark again, I sat in the living room, the divorce papers spread across the table. I ran my fingers over the legal seals, the careful lines dividing our lives. He'd taken everything except my voice, and even that didn't sound like mine anymore. I walked into the bedroom and stared at the empty space where his dresser used to be. It hit me how final silence can feel. I whispered into the room, "He doesn't even want to touch me now," as if saying it out loud would make it less real. But hearing my own voice cracked something open inside me. It wasn't about touch. It was about consequence. I remembered that first night, the dinner table, the way he'd looked at me when I said all his friends had tried me. I thought I was powerful then, untouchable. I'd mistaken reaction for validation, shock for control. Now I understood why he hadn't shouted. He'd seen what I didn't. That truth without restraint is just another kind of destruction. By midnight, I gathered the papers, folded them carefully, and put them back in the envelope. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the streetlights flicker. Somewhere far off, I thought I heard Nina's laugh again, or maybe it was just my memory trying to fill the silence. I told myself one last lie, that someday he'd realize I hadn't meant to hurt him, that I was just trying to be honest. But even that sounded false now. The only truth left was that I'd lost him the moment I started believing honesty meant never thinking about how words land. I turned off the lights, sat in the dark, and whispered the words I'd once said with pride. I didn't do anything wrong. This time, it didn't sound like conviction. It sounded like a question no one would ever answer. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.